The night my father laughed at me, something inside my chest cracked. We were all at the dinner table. My mom, my dad, my older brother Mark, and a few relatives. I had waited for dessert to share my idea. I had spent a year planning it. I had notes, numbers, and real proof it could work. I want to start a supply service for small local shops, I said. I've already tested it with 2 stores. Before I could finish, my dad let out a sharp laugh. Not a kind one. A business, he said. You can't even stick to a hobby. My mom sighed. You've always chased big dreams instead of stable work. Mark smirked. Startups eat money. Don't drag mom and dad into that. The table chuckled. My face burned. I tried to explain my plan, but no one listened. I felt small. I felt foolish. As I walked out to the porch, I heard my dad say, "She'll be back when it fails." That hurt more than the laughter. I didn't drive away right away. I just sat there in the car. Through the windshield, the patio lights glowed, laughter and clinking plates rising like a cruel symphony. Not a single parent stepped out. Not my brother. Not my mother. The casserole I had brought sat on the passenger seat, steam fogging the glass. I checked my phone. Family group chat. A post already, so grateful for a drama-free reunion this year. Drama-free. A photo followed, everyone smiling, my empty chair gone. I zoomed in, searching for proof I existed. Nothing. They didn't just exclude me. They erased me. And as I stared at that photo, a quiet resolve settled in my chest. If I was going to survive this family, I would do it without their permission. And maybe, without them at all. I'm Leora Vance, 29 years old, and I've always been the idea person in my family. That night at the dinner table, I realized they didn't see me as capable. They saw me as a dreamer who couldn't finish anything. When I was 10, I tried selling handmade bracelets on weekends. My dad said it was cute. At 15, I tutored neighborhood kids in math. My mom said I'd get bored. I never did. I just didn't always finish strong. Mark was different. He was steady. He studied business in college, and my parents trusted him with serious conversations about money. When he spoke, they leaned in. When I spoke, they smiled politely. They already had a picture of me, the dreamer, not the builder. That night, with my notes, spreadsheets, and research spread across the table, I wasn't guessing. I had spent a year studying supply chains, pricing, and local demand. I had quietly saved money, lined up my first clients, and tested my idea. I was ready. When my father laughed, sharp and cold, I felt something crack inside me. They didn't just doubt me, they assumed I would fail, and in that certainty, their laughter stung deeper than mockery ever could. I walked out to the porch, clutching my vision. For the first time I decided, if I failed, it would not be because I quit. And this time, no one would see me try. The next morning, I signed a lease on a tiny studio across town. One window, a small sink, barely enough space for a bed and a folding table I'd turn into a desk. It smelled like old paint, but it was mine. Moving boxes up 3 flights of stairs alone, I thought about the dinner table again. The laughter, the smirks, the quiet certainty my parents had that I would fail. My chest ached, but beneath it, something steadied me. I wasn't trying to prove them wrong in the moment. I was trying to prove to myself that I could do this. I unpacked my laptop, my printer, the stacks of notes I'd kept for months. I made a list of the first clients I'd contact. The plan was simple. Steady, reliable service, careful attention, no shortcuts. I would build roots, not flash. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed, thinking about how long I'd waited for someone to believe in me. No one had. My parents had laughed. My brother had copied ideas. Even so, I felt a quiet determination I could not ignore. This was my chance to start small, quietly, and build something real. The first client called the next day. My hands shook as I answered. I can deliver on Monday, I said, and check in weekly to make sure everything is on schedule. The client hesitated, then agreed. I sent a confirmation email with a note about my process and pricing. Every step felt deliberate. Every word mattered. I had learned that details are often the difference between respect and doubt. By the end of the week, I added 2 more local shops. Each delivery, each call, each follow-up reinforced my confidence. I didn't rush. I did not overpromise. I built a reputation quietly. Then I felt the first pang of fear. Mark had been asking questions, and I'd shared small details. I wanted him to see that I could handle this, but slowly, I realized he wasn't just curious. He was calculating. And I would have to be smarter. That evening, I wrote in my journal, "They think control is power. I think preparation is power. And they'll see the difference soon enough." One evening, after a long day of deliveries, I passed a small park on the way home. An older man sat on a bench, watching the sun fade behind the rooftops. He looked tired, quiet, but not sad. I stopped and offered him my umbrella. It had started drizzling. He smiled faintly. "Kindness is rare," he said. "I don't think it should be," I replied. He studied me closely. "You're the kind of person who can handle more than people expect. Don't let them define what you can do." I laughed softly, brushing rain from my hair. At the time, I didn't know he would become one of the few people outside my family who would truly see me. Not the dreamer, not the child they assumed would fail, but the builder. That night, I sat at my folding table, reviewing orders, client feedback, and schedules. I realized that every small, careful move mattered more than loud promises. My parents had tried to shame me into quitting. Mark had tried to steal my idea. But here in my little studio, I felt a quiet sense of power. The rain drummed softly against the window. I was alone but not helpless. This was just the beginning. 2 weeks later, my cousin Tara called. "So, how's the little business of yours going?" she asked, voice casual, but I could hear the doubt. "Steady," I said. "Steady?" she repeated, almost testing me. "You've always been too soft. Too nice. People walk all over you." I laughed quietly. "Kindness isn't weakness. It's different." She sighed. "One day you'll see. You can't survive if you keep giving people the benefit of the doubt." Her words echoed the unspoken message I'd lived with my whole life. My family would never take me seriously. But there was fire beneath her doubt, the same fire my parents had tried to snuff out with laughter. I hung up and stared at my ledger. Every delivery, every payment, every email with clients, it was evidence that I could handle this. I promised myself I'd let results do the talking. And when my parents saw the truth, it wouldn't be a conversation. It would be undeniable. That weekend, I made my first official delivery outside my initial trial area. 2 new shops, tight schedules, and a dozen boxes stacked carefully in the borrowed van. Traffic crawled, and a sudden downpour soaked my windshield. I kept my eyes on the road, memorizing every turn, every shortcut I had mapped. Mistakes weren't an option. I was carrying more than goods. I was carrying credibility. One shop owner watched as I unpacked the crates, smiling faintly. "You're prompt," she said. "Most deliveries are late or sloppy." "Not mine," I replied simply. By the time I returned to my studio, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening. I felt small but powerful. Each careful step was a rebellion against the quiet certainty that I would fail. Later that night, I checked messages from the day. Positive feedback stacked up, emails, texts, even a call from a client I hadn't expected. My family didn't know, and Mark had no idea how precise I had been. And yet I smiled. I didn't need approval from them. I only needed proof that I could do it. Then one morning, I noticed the first real sign of interference. Mark had called one of my suppliers. Not for advice, not to collaborate. He had been asking for pricing, schedules, delivery routes. Someone was feeding him small bits of my plan, and I knew exactly where it came from. Him. My chest tightened, but I didn't panic. I documented everything. Every call, every email, every conversation that could be traced. I wasn't going to fight in anger. I was going to respond strategically. I tightened contracts with suppliers, improved my scheduling, and personally called each client to reassure them. Small moves, precise and deliberate. Let Mark think he was ahead. Let my family see the narrative they wanted. Behind it, I was building a foundation they couldn't touch. That evening, I wrote in my journal. "They think control is power. I think preparation is power. And they'll see the difference soon enough." Weeks later, an email arrived. From someone I didn't know. "We've been following your work. Would you like to meet and discuss potential expansion? See." I stared at the screen. My heart raced. The first real outside recognition. Not from my parents. Not from Mark. From someone who valued what I had built. I scheduled the meeting. Every detail of my business was ready. Numbers, growth plans, supply chains, client feedback. I couldn't afford to stumble. Not now. Not after the months of proving myself quietly. That night, I sat in the studio alone. The rain pattered on the window. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future where my parents' laughter didn't define me. Tomorrow, I would step into that meeting with my head high. And this time, no one would underestimate me. The day of the meeting arrived. My studio felt too small suddenly, every stack of papers a reminder of how far I'd come alone. I wore my best jacket, polished shoes, and carried a folder with every detail of my business. The investor, Mr. Callahan, greeted me warmly but firmly. His office was minimalist, nothing flashy, just a table, chairs, and sunlight spilling across neat files. He asked about margins, client growth, and delivery schedules. Every question was precise, designed to test. I answered each one calmly, showing spreadsheets, emails, and schedules. He nodded, not once laughing or doubting me. When he asked about risk, I explained every contingency, every careful step I had built into the business. At the end, he leaned back and said, "You grow slower than your competitor, but your numbers are healthier. That counts for more than speed." Healthier. That word sank deep. For years, my parents had believed speed was everything. Mark had believed it too. But careful growth, calculated, disciplined, was the kind of power no one could snatch from me. I left that office feeling small but unstoppable. Finally, someone outside my family had seen me. Finally, proof that my work mattered, and laughter could not erase it. Mark's response was immediate. I noticed subtle changes in client behavior. One by one, small stores started mentioning new pricing offers from him. He had the advantage of my parents' funding, and now he was trying to burn past me fast. I could have panicked. I could have reached out to suppliers and shouted that he was copying me. But I didn't. I tightened contracts, adjusted pricing carefully, and personally reassured every client. Let him think he was winning. Behind the scenes, I strengthened my foundation. Then came the first real crack in his armor. A shop owner called, frustrated. Deliveries were late. Errors in invoices. His team was inexperienced and overextended. I didn't celebrate. I observed. I learned. I improved. I delivered promises that Mark couldn't. I became the reliable alternative. By the end of the month, I had quietly absorbed 2 of his clients who left because of mistakes. My parents still hadn't acknowledged the shift, but I felt it. Each mistake he made, each misstep, reminded me that patience and preparation last longer than pride and money. One evening, Tara texted, "You're really doing it. I didn't think you had it in you." I didn't reply. I didn't need validation from her. My real satisfaction came quietly, watching Mark struggle to keep up with mistakes he had created by rushing. Then the email arrived from Callahan's office. He wanted to fund expansion, an offer to inject capital and mentorship, no strings attached. My pulse quickened. Finally, resources without interference. But the same night, Mark called me. Calm, calculated. "You think you can outlast me?" he asked. "I'm not trying to outlast you," I said. "I'm trying to build something real." His silence lasted longer than expected. He had believed speed and spectacle were everything. I had built systems. I had built trust. That night, I sat at my folding table and wrote in my journal. They laughed. They doubted. They copied. But I am building a foundation they cannot shake. Weeks passed. Mark's company started showing the first real signs of strain. Late deliveries, complaints from clients, team turnover. He had spent his parents' money faster than he could stabilize operations. I stayed calm, reinforcing my systems. Each client was personally checked on. Each order logged. Each invoice reviewed. No shortcuts. Then my mother called. Soft, almost hesitant. "Leora, we may have misjudged you," she said. I froze. Not for joy, not for validation, but because the tone was familiar. A mixture of guilt and curiosity. They had invested in him, laughed at me, and now were realizing my growth was steady while his was shaky. I did not respond immediately. I waited. I let the call end naturally. The acknowledgement mattered, but only as a shadow over my own accomplishments. Their perception no longer dictated my confidence. 2 days later, my father asked to meet in person. When I sat across from him at a quiet cafe, he looked tired, cautious, almost humbled. "We'd like to invest in your company," he said. I blinked. Disbelief. Not joy. "You laughed at this idea," I whispered. He looked down at his coffee. "We didn't see it clearly," he admitted quietly. That was it. No apology. No admission of mockery. Just the first acknowledgement. I requested a formal proposal. When it arrived, it was clear. They wanted ownership, voting rights, final decisions. They weren't offering support. They wanted control. At the same time, Callahan's offer had clean terms. Equity, mentorship, no interference. The contrast was stark. One was family, eager to assert power. One was an outsider, offering trust. I signed with the investor. Quietly, deliberately. Stability, autonomy, and respect. Mark's company struggled further. Clients left, staff quit, suppliers demanded payment. My parents' money was trapped in his rapid expansion. And for the first time, they needed me, not to validate them, but to keep them afloat. I realized then, the tables had shifted. Laughter no longer defined my path. Preparation did. The moment I signed the deal with Callahan, I felt a calm surge of power. Not the kind you shout about. The kind that comes from knowing you did everything yourself, and now someone outside your family trusted you. Suddenly, my small studio felt bigger. I hired a part-time assistant to help manage schedules, updated routes, and reviewed contracts with suppliers. Every detail mattered. I couldn't let speed overtake accuracy. Mark noticed quickly. His calls became sharper, slightly bitter. "You're moving slowly," he said one afternoon. "You could scale faster if you tried." I didn't answer. I simply improved my systems. Orders were double-checked. Clients got updates on time. Every late delivery he made became proof that careful growth lasts longer than reckless ambition. That night, I checked public records quietly. Mark had taken another loan, increasing his risk. My parents were deeper in than I realized. They were trapped by their own pride, just like he was. I smiled faintly, alone at my folding table. Laughter no longer mattered. Stability did. And for the first time, I knew I could stand above their doubts and mistakes. Not through force, but through steady, undeniable growth. Mark's first real collapse came quietly. One of his long-term clients called me in frustration. "Deliveries are late again," the owner said. "We're losing patience." I didn't gloat. I helped. I offered to take over temporarily. I checked every box, every schedule personally. By the end of the week, 2 more of his clients switched to my service. At the same time, my parents were silent. They had funded his rapid growth, and now their investment was slipping. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and restraint. I wasn't trying to destroy him. I was proving that discipline and preparation outperform speed and pride. That evening, I made a mental note. Patience counts for more than impulse. Every misstep they made was a lesson, a quiet confirmation that I had chosen my path wisely. By the next week, Mark's company had visible cracks. Suppliers were pressing for early payments, staff were quitting, and deadlines were slipping. My parents' confidence was shaken. But my focus remained: steady growth, client trust, and careful planning. Then came the first hint of recognition outside my family. A regional industry blog wrote an article about my service. Reliable, disciplined, and growing steadily. My name was in print. For the first time, someone not related to me acknowledged my work. I called my team together. "This is what we built," I said. "Not flashy, not loud, but steady and dependable. That is our strength." Meanwhile, Mark tried to launch a quick promotion. Lower prices, faster delivery promises, flashy ads. Within days, errors piled up. Clients cancelled. Staff turnover accelerated. I watched silently. Every failure he created was avoidable, but he had chosen speed over stability. That night, I reflected on my parents. They had invested in him blindly, confident in what they thought was talent. Now they were forced to see that their certainty was flawed. The balance had shifted. Laughter and doubt were no longer weapons against me. My business, carefully nurtured, was proof of competence and resilience. A call from my father came late one evening. His tone was quieter than I'd ever heard. "We didn't know you were getting this attention," he admitted. I paused. This was not apology. Not acknowledgement of past mockery. Just curiosity and perhaps fear. "Yes," I said simply. "We've been building steadily." His voice softened. "Mark, he's struggling." I didn't answer immediately. I let him process the truth without me guiding it. 4 years, he had believed in image over preparation. Now he was confronting reality. By the next morning, I had orders for new clients who had read the article. Word of mouth spread. My name carried weight outside the family. I realized something. Their laughter had no power outside the walls of that dinner table. And when I built quietly, strategically, and reliably, I could rise above it without confrontation. For the first time I felt the shift. The silent control my parents tried to assert was no longer theirs to hold. Then my mother called. Tentative, soft, almost shy. "We may have misjudged your timing," she said. It wasn't a full apology. No admission of mockery. But it was acknowledgement. A few days later, my father asked to meet. I agreed, choosing a small cafe away from noise and attention. "We want to invest," he said quietly. I blinked. Disbelief, not joy. The very people who had laughed at me, who had cheered on Mark's copied idea, now needed me. Not to approve me, but to stabilize the situation they had helped create. I asked for a formal proposal. When it arrived, the terms were clear. Ownership, voting rights, final decisions. It was control, not support. At the same time, Callahan's offer was clean. Respect, mentorship, no interference. My choice was clear. I signed with the investor, quietly, deliberately. Stability and autonomy outweighed family approval. That night, I realized, the tables had turned. Laughter, doubt, and manipulation could no longer dictate my path. Preparation and discipline had done what emotion never could. I decided to host the next family reunion. Cream envelopes, simple gold lettering, invitations sent to every relative, including my parents and Mark. When they received it, I knew the questions would start. Why now? Why her? I didn't answer. I let the event speak for itself. The day arrived. Cars lined the driveway. Cousins whispered as they stepped out, stunned by the modest grandeur of my new warehouse-turned-event space. My parents drove slowly, faces tight with a mix of pride, doubt, and unease. I stood at the entrance, calm. "Welcome," I said simply, gesturing to the tables I had arranged, the staff ready, and the food prepared. Not flashy, but orderly. Thoughtful. Solid. Mark lingered at the back. Unsure. My mother tried a smile. My father's eyes scanned everything cautiously. For the first time in years I held control. Not by force but by preparation. I knew that silence could be louder than criticism. Each step I had taken, each careful decision, was visible here. This reunion wasn't just a gathering. It was proof that I could rise above mockery, manipulation, and doubt. Guests began to arrive. Each handshake, each hug, carried subtle astonishment. "She owns this?" someone whispered. Parents tried to mask it. My mother smiled politely. My father nodded slowly. Mark's jaw tightened. He had misjudged me entirely. I walked through the room calmly, ensuring every detail was perfect. Staff knew their roles. Deliveries were on time. Everything ran smoothly, effortlessly. I caught my parents' eyes for a moment. I didn't gloat. I didn't lecture. The quiet pride in my success was undeniable. It wasn't loud, it wasn't showy, and it couldn't be mocked. By the end of the evening, whispers had turned into acknowledgement. Relatives admired the space, asked about the business, complimented the efficiency. I realized they were seeing me the way I had always known I could be seen. And finally, Mark approached. Hesitant, quiet, realizing that his image, his speed, and his parents' approval could not outshine years of careful, steady work. Mother approached me privately. "You didn't have to make it so grand," she whispered. I looked at her calmly. I didn't. I opened my doors, that's all. Father added softly. We were wrong. No laughter. No smirks. No manipulation. Just acknowledgement. I realized then that victory wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about showing them who was right or wrong. It was about demonstrating stability, competence, and self-respect. Mark nodded beside them, silent. His pride had shifted into reflection. For once, he couldn't dominate the narrative. He could only learn. That night, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Quiet empowerment. I hadn't asked for belief. I had built results. And results, unlike laughter, cannot be denied. Dinner in the warehouse turned ballroom. Chandeliers, soft music. Simple but elegant. I stood before the family, staff around me, calm and collected. I built this because someone outside my family believed in me when I had nothing to offer but determination, I said. If someone closes a door on you, build your own. Applause rose gently. Not forced, not performative. The power had shifted. I was no longer invisible, underestimated, or dismissed. Parents nodded. Mark listened. Guests watched, impressed by both organization and vision. My success was not loud, but undeniable. I realized then, control is earned, not demanded. Respect comes from demonstration, not argument. And patience, persistence, and preparation outweigh laughter every time. After dinner, my parents approached privately. Mother whispered, I thought control meant love. I smiled softly. Love never closes doors. The golden light from the warehouse windows spilled behind me. For the first time, I didn't need approval to feel strong. Mark stayed quiet, reflecting, learning. My parents had finally seen the truth. Capability is quieter than mockery, stronger than doubt. I walked through the halls of the space I had built, alone for a moment, feeling the weight of every past insult and every quiet victory. The laughter that had once cut so deeply now seemed distant. What remained was strength, belief, discipline, and the understanding that when you work quietly, patiently, and honestly, the world eventually notices. Even those who once laughed at you. I had endured. I had built. And that endurance, that steady work, was the truest victory of all.